So Ellen, I know what you do, and I personally feel like that anybody going through any sort of health journey needs to look at nutrition as a part of their therapy, right?
Right.
I mean, food is medicine, and that's always the kind of thing that I talk about. But I want to back up a little bit and talk about just digestion, because I found that in doing classes and talking with folks that there's some misconceptions about sort of what happens. And this sounds redundant, so let's take it back to like almost elementary school level. When you swallow food, what happens?
It's interesting to think about digestion in two different ways. You have your mechanical digestion and chemical digestion.
Okay.
So when you're thinking about your GI tract and what is involved in digestion, you can think of it as sort of your upper GI and your lower GI. When you first eat, you take in food, of course, you chew, so a lot of mechanical digestion is going on in your mouth, why it's important to chew your food. And then, of course, you swallow it, and you have your pharynx that just keeps everything going down the right tube. It goes down to your esophagus, and that's where it hits your stomach. Now, interestingly, for people who've had their stomach removed, you know, a lot of people have the misconception that you can't even, like, how would you survive without a stomach? The stomach is basically very little you know, let's back up a little. As you know, when you chew food and you have amylase, it's a chemical from your saliva that starts breaking down those carbohydrates, so the bread and the crackers. When it gets to your stomach, think of your stomach, almost use the analogy of like a cement mixer on the back of a truck.
Sure.
There's a lot of mechanical things going on in your stomach to break that food down even farther, but even some of the digestion of the carbohydrates that started in your mouth stops when you get to the stomach because of the hydrochloric acid. That sort of stops that process, but it also aids in breaking things down. So your stomach is a reservoir. Food stays in your stomach maybe 3 hours. Very little digestion is going on. It's more of a process of breaking the food down. I should say very little absorption, but a lot of digestion. So the fact that someone may not have a stomach or partial stomach, really you can live a fine life without that. It's just a holding reservoir until it enters into your small intestines. Now the small intestines, that's really where all the action is happening. And you start with you have what's called your duodenum, and then it goes into your jejunum, and then into your ileum, and then it eventually comes out. And in your large intestines, that's where all the water is extracted, sodium, potassium, all of the interchange of your electrolytes, and then we know that the waste eventually comes out.
And those were all words that I had never heard before, and so in my particular case, when they said we're going to take your jejunum and move it to where your esophagus had been, and I looked to my wife and I said, did we pack that? I don't even know what the jejunum is. And so I think, you know, anytime you enter into a medical diagnosis, you're always learning a new vocabulary. So if these words don't sound familiar to someone watching now, you don't have to know them to make them work. I mean, this is the kind of thing that just sort of happens.
Right, and even if you were to think about this in terms of piping, like if you had a broken pipe, there are ways that you could take a part of a pipe and attach it to another part of a pipe. So basically what they did in your case was, yes, they took your esophagus, so they removed then your stomach and then your duodenum, and then they pulled up your jejunum. And so but what has happened though by doing that is there's iron absorption, calcium absorption.
B12, I think, is another one.
B12. There are certain things that by removing parts, you're also interrupting parts of absorption.
I think for anybody that's watching and is trying to learn, it's so frustrating at first because you want to get back to your normal way of eating. But it took me well into probably my second year before I really got a grip of what my safe foods were. And for me, I did great with nut butter, so things like peanut butter, cashew butter, almond butter, because there was a lot of protein and it was easy to digest protein for me. But I've spoken with other patients that they just can't tolerate that. You know, it's too heavy.
When I first met you, one of the things that you said, and I think about often, is if I knew this was going to be my last meal, would I want it to be, you know, a processed, fatty food? It is all about fresh, and I just cannot stress enough that eating does have to be enjoyable. and keeping it real, you can't go wrong.
I love it. Let's end on that note, keeping it real. That's fantastic. Well, Ellen, I normally would give you a hug, but we're going to bump microphones. But thank you.
It's okay.
Thank you so much, and
Thank you.
and we will do this again.
Sounds great. Thank you.